Hi there. So I wanted to talk to you today about a topic that I think is pretty important, and that topic is microaggressions. Some of you may wonder, what is a microaggression? Maybe that's a new word for you. Others may have heard about it and know something about it. There's a lot of great articles out there if you just look them up. Great things you can find about what a microaggression is. I'm going to give sort of my definition of a microaggression. So a microaggression is what happens when you have, in society, they're often the way that our society, particularly in the West, is set up, is that we have a category that we sort of privilege over others as being normal or normative. And then anything that's not that norm is sort of considered less than. So one example of this would be this notion of coming from even like from the ancient Western world, this notion of male is normal, male is human. So when people talk about what it means to be human, they mean this sense of what it means to be male in power. And then anything that's not male in sort of the construction that we live by oftentimes around gender is female, then would be less than. This happens with the construction of whiteness in U.S. America in particular and around the world. This dynamic plays out because of the influence of the West, where you have white versus anyone who's not white or people of color. Even those terms that we use are loaded because it's a social construction that we've set up around what that means. And so what happens then is sort of the big dynamics when people are overtly oppressive. We don't call that a microaggression. It's like everybody knows that's just aggression. But a microaggression is what happens when we allow that dynamic of privilege and normativity to begin to shape the way that we think without ever thinking about it. It's a subconscious thing that just we sort of accept because it's the way that we're raised, it's the way we're socialized, it's the way society works, and so we just accept that as normal. And so a microaggression then happens when we play something out between two people, where someone who has privilege, oftentimes, though they can be, microaggressions can happen between people without privilege, but where some dynamic around privilege and oppression, the person who's being oppressed is reminded of that oppression, of that dynamic at play. It's essentially a microaggression is when someone is put into their place within a dynamic of privilege. So I would say a microaggression is kind of like a reminder to someone that you don't have the same privilege as the person whose particular difference has been socially defined as normal or normative. Microaggressions can be direct, so they can be something like directly to you, like a statement or an action. So like a statement might be someone who's encountering a person who, maybe someone who is transgender or genderqueer or gender non-conforming, asks in a public space where a restroom is. And the other person, without knowing that they're doing it, makes an assumption about the person who asked and what their gender is, and they tell them where either the men's room or the women's room is. And so they're giving this, they're assigning that person a gender in that moment. They don't even know that they're doing it, but it's this direct thing towards the person. That would be a microaggression. Something else would be like if people of different skin colors are standing in a line or in a restaurant, and the person serving, and they could be someone of any color, they could be white or a person of color, or they could, and they could the person who's serving the folks in the line or in a restaurant chooses to, maybe consciously or unconsciously skip a person of color to serve someone who's whiter than them, to serve people with lighter skin tone first. And so in that moment, like, they may not even know that they're doing it, but you can be pretty sure that the person who was just passed over, who was just skipped, noticed. And that's a reminder that you're not the person who's most privileged here. Microaggressions can be indirect. So something that would be indirect would be like going back to the restrooms, like that there's a men's room and a women's room, that's just the norm of our society. It's sort of this structural thing, like architects, when they build buildings, they put up restrooms for men and women, when building codes are being done, or when changing tables are put in restrooms, that they would put a changing table in the women's room but not in the men's room, because they expect that women should be doing childcare. But that you would have like a men's room and a women's room, and just those options, rather than having gender-neutral bathrooms or single-stall bathrooms that are friendly to people of any gender and also to families and things like that. Like, so it's a norm of society that is set up in a way that when a person who's not gender-conforming goes out into a public place, nobody's there saying you have to choose which restroom there is, but there's a sign that's placed up outside these two doors, and you're being asked to fit into this gender binary in a way where maybe you don't fit either of those really tightly, or maybe you were assigned one gender at birth based on your genitals, and that's not who you identify as, and so you have to make a choice in that moment. Maybe it's a choice of which one you feel comfortable with, or how you think other people perceive you in that moment. Do they perceive me as male or as female? And if I go into one door or the other, in this environment, will I be safe? Will people confront me about this? Would people put my life in physical danger? So that's like an indirect microaggression. It's a sign on the wall. Something else would be, this happens to me all the time on buses in Seattle, is I will get on a bus, and, there will be somebody usually like sitting towards the back of the bus who is maybe they're drunk or a little wasted, and they get in a fight with somebody else. They're yelling, things get louder, they're yelling back and forth, and one of them will yell out the F word. Not that F word, but the F word directed at gay people. And I don't, like, in most of the situations, I don't have any inclination that any of the parties involved in the fight are gay. It's just the go-to word that they use to scream out something derogatory at the other person. And I'm sitting there on the bus, minding my own business, and this word gets yelled, and it's not being yelled at me, but I feel triggered. I begin to question if I'm safe or not in that space. And so that's something that's indirect. It's not directed towards me. So then the last aspect of a microaggression that I want to talk about is a microaggression, and this one is the one that makes me the most angry. This is when someone, usually this one happens from someone with privilege, who asks someone without privilege in a particular dynamic to participate in upholding that dynamic of oppression. So what this looks like would be like, in U.S. America, it's really, really common for people with white privilege of European descent to ask someone when they first meet them, where are you from, that I would come up to you and be like, oh, hi, I'm Daniel, what's your name? Oh, where are you from? And, if it's another person who has white privilege and they say, I'm from Minneapolis, then it's like, oh, cool, what part of Minneapolis? Whereas if it's someone who doesn't have white privilege, who's been coded in our society as a person of color, then if they say Minneapolis, then there's an immediate sort of squidgy-eyed like response of, you know, but where are you really from? Like, where are your people from? Where did your ancestors come from? Where did you immigrate from? This sense of you're not supposed to be here. That's the subtle message that underlies that. It's not what part of Minneapolis, but it's, no, where did you really come from originally? This is not a question that gets asked of most white people when they say Minneapolis. And I'm just choosing that as a random city. I don't think I've ever actually been to Minneapolis. Anyways, I'm from Atlanta. But I don't get asked, but where are you from originally? Like, where did your grandparents, like, did they immigrate in the 30s, or did they come over on the Mayflower? Like, when did you get here? That's not a question that I get asked as a white man in this society. And so in that moment, the person who's being asked that question, if they respond and they say, oh, well, my parents came, you know, my parents have lived in Minneapolis their whole lives, my great-grandparents immigrated from XYZ, like, then, like, they're being asked to participate in reinforcing that dynamic that says they don't belong here. And so that kind of, that line of, like, questioning, it's similar with, like, when someone who's not gender conforming, maybe they're dressed in a way that's fairly androgynous, or maybe they're a transgender person, and someone asks them, what are you? Meaning, tell me what your gender is. It's this moment where that person is being asked to say why they don't fit with the dynamic of privilege and normativity. Another example would be, you know, anytime, like, and this is one that I get a fair amount, like when an LGBTQ person is asked to justify, you know, how is it that you read the Bible, or how is it you justify your religion or your faith and your lifestyle? These sorts of questions, they put the person in the position of having to justify themselves to the other person, as if the other person, everything about their life doesn't, like, they're in the position of being the one who is doing the questioning. And so it's upholding that dynamic of power that they have as someone whose body and experience is considered normative in society. So that's sort of what microaggressions are. So I want to tell a little story about an example of a microaggression. This is Daniel, and you're watching my YouTube channel. It's a bunny rabbit!